Ladies and gentlemen, this next segment of the podcast is brought to you by the Heritage Foundation. For over 50 years, the Great Heritage Foundation has been America's outpost in Washington, fighting against the D.C. federal bureaucracy and working to secure a future that allows Americans to live the good life. For too long, common sense principles have been ignored by many of the very leaders claiming to fight for America. But the Heritage Foundation is proud to hold our leaders accountable and stand up for America's founding principles. Paid for by the Heritage Foundation.
He's here. Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Mark Levin.
So there have been so many things that I have been super optimistic about. I've been super excited to tell you. We are on the verge of monumental victories, reigning in tyranny, and maybe, just maybe, the BBB. But that's actually not where I'm starting the show today, because within about the last hour or so, there are a lot of things that have gone at least somewhat sideways. I mean, some a little bit earlier in the day, but definitely within the last hour and a half or so, there are some things that have gone sideways that have really started to grind my gears. Now, obviously, this is not Mark Levin. Mark enjoying a little time. It is Brian Mudd with you. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. And super pumped heading into this week because we are winning. It's Independence Day week. And then, I'm going to start with the Votorama thing. And I mean not to get myself into a rabbit hole here at the onset of the show, but some things just need to be said. And so there is a very direct message about now for the Vice President of the United States. So, Mr. Van, stand by. Stand by for news. Okay, so here's the deal. Based upon how closely you have been watching developments with the one big, potentially aesthetically pleasing bill, you know, might be beautiful. It has some warts on it, right? Got some warts. But if you don't stare at it like head on, or if you look at it the right line, maybe it puts a little makeup on, could look beautiful, right? But anyway, at a minimum, the somewhat at least aesthetically pleasing bill. You might have known that the Senate parliamentarian, which you may know way more than you ever wanted to know about if you have been paying attention. One of the things that the Senate parliamentarian ruled on, Medicaid and illegal aliens, and specifically that in order to meet the reconciliation process, meaning a simple majority vote in the Senate, not a 60-vote filibuster-proof majority. Now, you know what? You can't kick illegal aliens. You can't even kick the criminal illegal aliens off of Medicaid, which is a whole other thing that we're going to get into in just a bit. By the way, because I did promise that I've got a lot of good stuff for you today, coming up in the second hour, I'm going to get into exactly what the OBBB means to you. Cut through the crap, tell you exactly how much you are set to save and how much your taxes are going to go up if this thing doesn't pass. I'm going to tell you exactly what it means to you. And there's a lot of good news there. I mean, if they don't screw this thing up. But the Senate parliamentarian and this Medicaid thing. So Senate parliamentarian says, yeah, you know what? You can't do reconciliation. You can't do a simple Senate majority vote and kick even criminal illegal aliens off of Medicaid. So as part of the Votorama that's been going on throughout the day today, one of the measures that came up for a vote, and this is about a little over an hour ago now, was this measure to kick illegal aliens off of Medicaid. It failed. It failed. And it failed because almost every Democrat voted to keep illegal aliens on Medicaid. Almost every Democrat voted to keep even criminal illegal aliens on Medicaid. It failed 56-44. Again, because the parliamentarian said you need 60 votes. So this is my message for the Vice President of the United States, who has been standing by at the United States Senate all day in case he actually is needed as a tie-breaking vote. Get your ass off of whatever seat it's on right now and go tell the Senate parliamentarian to pound sand. Here's the deal with the Senate parliamentarian. This unelected position does not get to rule through some kind of weird self-imposed executive fiat. You know, they don't get to play like they're some district court judge and I am king of all legislation. The bottom line is there are two ways that you can break a decision by the Senate parliamentarian. And this has happened 5 times since 1967. The two ways you can have the Senate overrule through a vote the parliamentarian. So that did not happen here. The other one is that the president of the Senate, of course, the vice president of the United States, can tell the Senate parliamentarian to pound sand or whatever it is they want to tell them, but overrule them. Of the 5 times this has happened since 1967, twice the parliamentarian has been overruled by Senate vote. 3 times by the vice president. This needs to become number 4. So before we advance into anything else I was planning to do with this show, JD Vance, get your butt off of whatever seat it's on right now and go tell the Senate parliamentarian to pound sand. In the grand scheme of absurd, I never want to hear another person talk about, oh my gosh, people are going to lose Medicare. They're going to lose all the Medicare or Medicaid. We're going to get people who need Medicaid off Medicaid. And by the way, that's a guy. That's a guy who like neutered himself. It's the guy like back in 2020 who was going, ooh, mean Trump tweets. Give me Joe Biden. You know that guy? He's still around. Still neutered, obviously. Just different issue. So that needs to happen. So that's why I'm starting the show there. Because there's something actionable in real time for the vice president of the United States. And another reason this is a problem is in part for that issue, but also some of the other things that the Senate parliamentarian ruled on. You now have the House Freedom Caucus that is freaking out. And so even if the vote goes down in the Senate tonight, you have members of the House Freedom Caucus pledging to blow the one big, beautiful bill act up when it gets to the House. So out of a means of self-preservation to the vice president, to this administration, to the president's agenda, Vance should be doing what he can in real time to try to save this thing. Speaking of needing saving, the other bit of breaking news that's come down within the past hour, you kind of saw this coming, but now that we're in the 11th hour with a vote that could go down potentially tonight in the Senate on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, you have Elon Musk who has come out and said, quote, every member of Congress who campaigned on reducing government spending and voted for the big, beautiful bill, they will lose their primary next year if it's the last thing I do on this earth. Again, you kind of knew that was going to happen at some point, but Musk is now weighing in. Like, yeah, if you're a conservative and you vote for this thing, I'm primarying you next year. So Musk is now doing everything he can possibly do to blow this thing up. So that is the breaking news as we start the show. And what has changed my entire tune, which was otherwise going to be a bit more optimistic out of the jump here. I do want to talk about a monumental victory. I do want to talk about something. Let's get into it. How about we actually... This is where I intended to start the show with you. Because there have been so many monumental victories for President Trump recently. I mean, when you hear Trump himself talking about a monumental victory, you might be wondering which one? Which one? Are we talking about blowing up Iran's nuclear program? Ending the related war? Are we talking about getting NATO countries to pay their fair share for military defense under the alliance? Maybe he's talking about the Chinese trade deal coming together, or the Canadians caving to Trump's trade demands over the weekend. By the way, speaking of trade, the UK trade deal that had been ratified already, today was the first day it actually took effect. Maybe President Trump was talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, because it had been on track up till, I don't know, very recently. Trump could be talking about the S&P 500 and NASDAQ reaching all-time highs yet again today as we've closed out the first half of the year in record territory. How many people that were in full freakout mode after Liberation Day saw that one coming? By the way, raise his hand here, because as I told you right around that window of time, that was one of the greatest buying opportunities in American history. I like to say I've not made a career out of being wrong. Anyway, all those are massive wins, right? Maybe Trump's monumental victory is just about the economy generally, because that is going awfully well. And one of the amazing things is that President Trump has had monumental wins with all of those things pretty much within the past week. But remarkably, as we take a look at President Trump, and he has been working at this record pace to make America great again, Trump's monumental win came after his administration's huge wins at the United States Supreme Court. As Trump said on Friday, the Supreme Court has delivered a monumental victory for the Constitution, the separation of powers, and the rule of law. And they most certainly did, as the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 ruling, put an end to the unconstitutional abuse of anti-American post-constitutional district court judges. Did you know? I wanted to update you as to the extent of the new form of lawfare. You know, these Boasbergs and district court judges who think they're as powerful as the President of the United States. Do you know that we have had 303 lawsuits filed against the Trump administration so far? This is day 160. 160 of the Trump administration. So in other words, we are averaging basically 2 lawsuits per day against the Trump administration, weekends included. And of them, of the 303 lawsuits filed, only 12 have been closed. Because you have all these left-wing groups that seek left-wing activists in robes who've most commonly pretended that they, the low-level federal district court judges, are as powerful as the President of the United States. And so it was always an obvious and an insane argument. But nevertheless, leftist activists in robes with TDS had partially or fully blocked. How many do you think? How many of President Trump's actions do you think these district court judges had blocked? 97. Partially or fully blocked 97 of President Trump's directives. By the way, he signed 164 executive orders. There are another 75 cases that are pending right now. In other words, there are actually more outstanding cases than orders that have not been messed with. The nationwide injunction part that was wholly unconstitutional. How many wholly unconstitutional nationwide injunctions were issued? 40. 40. So as Justice Amy Coney Barrett wrote in the court's opinion on Friday, the injunctions before us today reflect a more recent development. District courts asserting the power to prohibit enforcement of a law or policy against anyone. These injunctions, known as universal injunctions, likely exceed the equitable authority that Congress has granted to the federal courts. And so, yes, with that, the Supreme Court put an end to the tyranny of the district court judges. For now, there's more on that to come, and I'll pick up there next, along with all the other late breaking news we've got here. Plus, we're going to talk about saying no to slugs as well. I'll explain. This is Brian Mudd, in for the great one.
Mudd Levin.
President Trump is in Washington with a mandate from the American people to solve the border crisis, reverse the effects of Bidenflation, and restore American greatness. But since January 20, judges across our country have consistently been blocking President Trump's attempts to fulfill his mandate. The Heritage Foundation has been analyzing the situation, and they've been able to identify the legal issues with these judges' actions, as well as the solutions that can end this potential crisis. Now, to see the results of the Heritage's analysis for yourself, go to heritage.org/Levin, heritage.org/Levin. There you'll gain exclusive access to the Heritage Foundation's guide to solving the problem of limiting President Trump's executive actions. Stopping these judges might be the only way to protect Americans and take back our nation. So go to heritage.org/Levin, that's heritage.org/Levin, and get your free copy today. That's heritage.org/Levin, paid for by the Heritage Foundation.
So the Medicaid thing is so much BS. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin. So much BS. But the biggest BS of all is what is happening and what ended up clearing in the Votorama, which is people want to talk about getting kicked off of Medicaid. You have illegal immigrants, even criminal illegal immigrants that are going to be kept on Medicaid, even if it passes as it is currently written. So I do not want to hear about anybody getting kicked off of Medicaid. And I will end up breaking down these slugs. Let me be clear. Anybody who gets kicked off Medicaid, if the One Big Beautiful Bill Act passes, never should have been on it in the first place. You're a slug. Anybody getting kicked off of Medicaid, if this happens, is a slug who needs to get their lazy butt off the couch and stop living off the rest of us. I'm going to explain exactly who these lazy slugs are in just a few. But this is apparently going to be one of those shows where we get a lot of breaking news. And so completely unrelated to what we've been talking about, but big story. So you might remember the 4 University of Idaho students that were murdered in 2022. Well, the piece of human debris, Brian Coburg, who's been on trial for their murders, he's taken a plea deal. And so Brian Coburg has pled guilty to murdering those 4 University of Idaho students. He's accepted a life in prison sentence. They removed the death penalty for the plea. So that just went down. In the grand scheme of things that are going down, hopefully it's not going to be the BBB tonight. So I'm going to walk through some of what we're talking about on the judicial stuff, what the next game is going to be played by the district court judges and by the leftists. And we're going to talk about who really would lose Medicaid. It's only people who never deserved to have it in the first place. I'm Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin.
Are you concerned about the rising number of judges who've been limiting President Trump's executive orders? Now, if you're not concerned yet, you should be. When these judges use injunctions to block President Trump's attempts to fulfill his mandate from the American people, it is we, the people, who lose out. Thankfully, the Heritage Foundation has the policy solutions to stop these threats to our judicial system. So go to heritage.org and get your free copy of the How to Stop Activist Judges ebook. This resource explains exactly what these judges are doing, why it matters, and how under the Constitution they can be stopped. President Trump's agenda is in danger, but even more importantly, the safety of Americans and the future of our nation could be at stake. So please go to heritage.org/Levin, heritage.org/Levin. Get your free ebook today. That's heritage.org/Levin, paid for by the Heritage Foundation.
So that is just an all-time favorite right there. I mean, that was an instant classic, guilty pleasure. The Daddy, You're My Daddy. That'll live for forever. Of course, from the NATO summit last week. Part of what was so great about that, by the way, was just, that was the Sky News reporter there asking the question. She was sincere. You know, you got Marco, and what's funny is I was texting with one of the White House correspondents that was right before the president there, and he was sending me pictures. And, you know, it was like constant. You didn't need Secret Service there, because between Marco Rubio on one side and Pete Hegseth on the other, you took a look at their expressions all throughout. I mean, they were ready to bounce all comers. They were intense, everything else, and obviously a lot of serious stuff that was going on, and that they were that the president was being asked about. But then when Marco just lost it when she asked that question, that was and Trump held it. That was the beautiful thing. And then she stayed with her serious question. It was just good entertainment for all. Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin. I'm the host of The Brian Mudd Show. You can catch my podcast, The Brian Mudd Show, wherever you get your podcasts. At Brian Mudd Radio socially. Would love to hear from you and connect with you. And so one of my favorite things to do in this world is to be right here with you, guest hosting for the great one, Mark Levin. And we do have a lot of great things to talk about. I was actually mostly planning on talking about great things. We did have some breaking news heading into the show that not necessarily some of the best possible things that could have happened or that we may be talking about. But we have had more wins than not. Again, you take a look at what has been happening, and just within the past week, you take a look at bombing Iran's nuclear program. You talk about NATO countries paying their fair share for military defense. By the way, I'll tell you how much that's going to save us as well in just a bit. You talk about the Chinese trade deal coming together, Canada caving to Trump, England's trade deal going into place today. You talk about the S&P 500 and NASDAQ reaching all-time highs, closing out the first half of the year. Just so many good things going on. And yeah, we got some really important Supreme Court wins over the past week as well. And that's where I left off. And I want to pick up there because the Supreme Court made a major move, obviously, to put an end to the dictatorship that had emerged with the Boasbergs of the world, the low federal court district court judges, the universal injunction, 40 of them that had been issued against the Trump administration so far. And you had the tyranny of those district court judges ended last Friday. But for now. So we'll likely see a new tactic that is going to be attempted going forward. And the effort is going to be class action. You're going to see an effort to obtain class action status for lawsuits, and also for left-wing states that are going to be pursuing those cases as well, going in with these left-wing groups to try to gain as much jurisdiction as possible for these rulings. Because they're going to say, well, you know, my district is this district, so they're going to try to bring as many people into the fold as possible for low court judges to try to rule on these things. So that is the next tactic and where it's going. But nevertheless, what happened was necessary, and it was a monumental victory, not just for Trump, but for the country, as the president indicated. But of course, there were other monumental SCOTUS victories last week, including the court recently upholding Tennessee's law banning child mutilation, what's also known as gender-affirming care. By the way, if you want to know who a sick freak is, a really sick, disgusting freak of a human, it's somebody who calls child mutilation gender-affirming care. Anybody that travels down that path, not the kind of people you want babysitting your kids, I can tell you that much. So yes, the Supreme Court said no to child mutilation, yes to religious liberty, as the court ruled in favor of parents pulling their kids out of classes that indoctrinate them with children with the homosexual alphabet agenda. A ruling that is kind of like doubly rewarding to have come down during Pride Month. Speaking of a time in which, like, you got immoral things and indoctrination imposed throughout this country. By the way, I mean, there is one thing that has been nice to see this month. And it was my hypothesis going in. You notice how much less queer June turned out to be this year? A lot less queer. A lot less wokeness. Still some of it out there. But yeah, not nearly as gay, this country, as it was even a year ago. Certainly not as homosexual as they made things a couple years ago. Remember you could just enjoy a rainbow without thinking of a dude in drag? So, and with that, turning attention to the BBB. So, all through the weekend, you probably followed some of what went down. The Senate's all-night reading of the theoretically, aesthetically pleasing bill. The vote-a-rama that's been going on today. Who knows, the pending vote tonight. Kind of lost track of where we are in the whole vote-a-rama thing. And we'll see. I mean, the idea was we're going to get through vote-a-rama and we're going to get to a vote tonight. If that happens, a couple of people are asking me, what do you think? Is the Senate going to pass this thing? Well, I mean, Elon is obviously trying to do his best in real time to sink this thing. But you got to say on balance, why would 51 senators have voted to get this far? Because they really wanted Elizabeth Warren to have a lot of time to talk to them throughout the night? Sunday morning? Was that really what they were voting for? They wanted that to take place. They really just wanted some more time to be able to hear the sweet whisper of Chuck Schumer in their ear. I don't think that's what anybody was going for, right? So I don't know that anybody votes on Saturday to bring this thing to this point only to say, and I'm going to end up killing it in the end. I mean, you have to be a little bit masochistic if that was your end game. So I've got to think that the 51 senators that voted to get it here are probably still in the game. And, Republicans could still lose one more, and J.D. Vance could be the tie-breaking vote if it got down to it. So the biggest question of all might not necessarily be what happens in the Senate potentially tonight, but it's actually what's going down with your House representative with the OBBBA, as the case happens to be. Now, you remember the House version of the bill, it passed by exactly one vote the first time, and so there is no margin to spare. Now, one of the things that I spent a little time doing, trying to figure out exactly what are the biggest differences. What are the real sticking points here between the House version and the Senate's final bill? And I've got to throw out the asterisk that I have not put any changes from any vote-a-rama stuff in here today. I'm not sure if we've had any changes with the vote-a-rama stuff anyway, last that I was able to tell. So this might be what it is in real time anyway. But if you're really trying to figure out, okay, where are these big differences that could end up being such a sticking point in the House? You have tighter Medicaid work requirements and thus greater savings that were put into the Senate plan. Except that now you have illegal aliens because of the Senate parliamentarian and J.D. Vance not having overruled her yet. Vance, get your butt up and overrule the parliamentarian. And so illegal aliens would now stay in. But otherwise, the Medicaid work requirements are tighter that were put into this thing in the Senate than in the House. The House version raised the SALT cap for deductions from $10,000 to $40,000 and would make it permanent. The Senate version kept the $40,000 cap, but made it temporary, expiring after 2030. The Senate increased the standard deduction for seniors over 65, which would be up to $6,000 per year. That's $2,000 higher than the House. And I'll just pause on this real quick because I think there's a lot of confusion with seniors on this. You remember that President Trump last year, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and then a little bit later in the campaign season, he said, and maybe no tax on Social Security either. Remember how he did that? It wasn't as definitive as no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. So what actually is in the one big, potentially aesthetically pleasing bill with a wart or two that maybe you put some makeup on and it's okay? What you end up getting is an increase in standard deductions that basically covers the taxes on Social Security for almost all seniors. So it has almost essentially the same effect, but it's a different way of getting there. So hopefully that's helpful. So yeah, the Senate increased the standard deduction for seniors 65 and older to $6,000 per year, $2,000 higher than the House went. Now, the Senate version also would increase the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. Now, that is $1 trillion more than the House. That looks like it could be a sticking point for some of the Freedom Caucus folks. I mean, when I was really trying to get persnickety digging into some of the details on this stuff, I mean, like the Senate version fades out solar tax credits more slowly than the House version. The Senate version includes 20% less in school choice grants than the House version, while leaving the Pell Grant program intact. I mean, there's more to the story, but that's kind of the gist of it. You know, at the point where I'm getting into solar tax credits and Pell Grant stuff, I'm like, you know what? The divide is actually not that huge. It actually is not. None of these changes are like major changes. I mean, the debt ceiling thing, okay. So we are talking about, you know, $1 trillion more in the Senate than the House. That is not nothing. But we're not talking like just wholesale changes from the House version. For the House members that are becoming holier than thou all of a sudden on this thing. Now, the one thing that, of course, has been the thing that House Freedom Caucus members have mentioned throughout the day today, the end result. So if you go by some of the latest CBO scoring, theoretically, the Senate version would run the federal debt up by $500 to $800 billion more than the original House bill over the next decade. Now, one of the arguments here is that it's largely due to expanded tax breaks in the Senate version that a lot of conservatives would argue will produce a higher growth economy, and thus that'll end up producing more revenue for the Treasury than what the CBO is projecting. So it actually won't end up being that. Which, by the way, most of the time when members of Congress say that kind of thing's going to happen, they're lying to you. But if you remember the first time around, what did Trump say he was going to do? We're going to pass the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, and it is going to create a 4% growth economy. And remember how everybody, you know, all your Wall Street economists said, oh, that'll never happen, can't happen. And it did. So it's happened once. If it's going to happen again, it'll happen with Trump's second crack at tax policy and his overall agenda. So anyway, it is a far cry from where the conversation started in the Senate. You might recall that when the House bill got to the Senate, the idea was, well, we're going to end up having more savings than the House. That doesn't really look like where we ended up. I mean, there is, like, for example, in Medicaid with the work requirements. But, you know, then it's made up with extra tax cuts. So where does the House stand on this thing? We know it's divided along political lines. And it can't be divided more than the loss of 3 Republicans on the GOP side. So whether your House representative is down with the BBB ultimately could determine whether President Trump receives what to him in this entire thing would be his ultimate victory. I'm Brian Mudd, in for the great one.
Mudd Levin.
President Trump is in Washington with a mandate from the American people to solve the border crisis, reverse the effects of Bidenflation, and restore American greatness. But since January 20, judges across our country have consistently been blocking President Trump's attempts to fulfill his mandate. The Heritage Foundation has been analyzing the situation, and they've been able to identify the legal issues with these judges' actions, as well as the solutions that can end this potential crisis. Now, to see the results of the Heritage's analysis for yourself, go to heritage.org/Levin, heritage.org/Levin. There you'll gain exclusive access to the Heritage Foundation's guide to solving the problem of limiting President Trump's executive actions. Stopping these judges might be the only way to protect Americans and take back our nation. So go to heritage.org/Levin, that's heritage.org/Levin, and get your free copy today. That's heritage.org/Levin. paid for by the Heritage Foundation.
Parents have the right to know what their children are learning at school and to exercise their First Amendment freedom of religion to opt out of divisive and ideological lessons that go against their family's values and beliefs.
Yeah, amen. That's Linda McMahon, Education Secretary. That was one of the Supreme Court rulings that came in favor of religious liberty, allowing parents to remove their kids from classes that indoctrinate with the homosexual alphabet agenda. And that was just one of two really important, basically related rulings by the Supreme Court recently. The other one on the gender child mutilation stuff. And, you know, just real quick to put a fine point on it, also as we wrap up Pride Month, good God, sanity prevails. But Democrats are nuts. I wanted to bring you a little information about gender dysphoria and just how important this stuff is. That, like, you know, child mutilation is bad, okay? You know, like, we could all agree on that, right? But I don't think a lot of people really understand the depth of what's been happening here. Because in many respects, the nuttiest thing of all is that child mutilation is even a debated topic of conversation. I mean, how did we ever arrive at this point? I guess it was about the time that we got to the IA before the plus. I think by the time we got to the IA and the homosexual alphabet, they're like, yeah, and let's just start the child mutilation thing. Like, yeah, they keep letting us add letters. Why not? So anyway, in recent years, you've had the rapid growth of what's been called gender dysphoria that has been diagnosed. And by the way, the first thing is any doctor that diagnoses a child with gender dysphoria, you want to talk about going straight to jail, not passing go, and collecting any money? That's exactly what should happen. So the first thing is you have these sycophant doctors that will diagnose gender dysphoria. How many cases per year have we been pacing recently? Got a number in mind? We have had an average of over 42,000 children per year in this country between the ages of 6. Yes, 6 to 17. Or in other words, over 115 children per day in this country being diagnosed by a quack who should probably be behind bars, with a lot of the parents of these kids that act. Now, when the children have gone down this path, over 90% of the time, it's been hormone treatments, but you do have about 10% that have actually been doing surgeries, which tells you that you have about 12 actual outright mutilations that happen per day in this country of children of as young as 6. These people get to practice medicine. It is a remarkable thing. And so, yeah, while many blue states have expressly legalized child mutilations, most red states have gone the other way. And that was what the Supreme Court ruled. It was the 6-3 decision in Tennessee's related law. A lot of states have the law, but Tennessee's specifically prohibits all medical treatments intended to allow a minor to identify with or live as a purported identity inconsistent with the minor's sex or to treat that condition. So, yes, some sanity to put an end to the child mutilation. All right, the BBB. It's a beautiful thing for you and me. I'll explain next. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin.
This segment of the podcast is exclusively sponsored by Pure Talk. Pure Talk offers great coverage and can save your family money on your wireless bill every single month. Go to puretalk.com to find the plan that's right for you. Thank you again for listening, and thank you so much for this sponsorship, Pure Talk.
He's here. He's here. Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Mark Levin.
President Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill, now on the floor of the Senate, is the most dangerous piece of legislation in the modern history of our country.
You know, if you were like potentially on the fence about the BBB, if you're like, I don't know about this thing, that should get you off the fence right there. When you got when you got Bernie Sanders saying, this is the worst thing that has ever been brought in modern history. And I know history because the only person who maybe has been around here as long as Joe Biden is me. Remarkably, far more lucid than the former president. Anyway, when Bernie Sanders says this is the most dangerous thing that he has seen, man, that's got to be awfully good for capitalism. That's got to be a good day when the socialist tells you it's the most dangerous thing. Must be really good for the economy and really good for you. So if you want lower taxes, do you want lower taxes? If you want lower taxes, the BBB, it's a beautiful thing. And I'm going to break down exactly how beautiful it is to you, what it means to you, in just a few. But first, mentioned in the first hour, Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin, about the Medicaid work requirements. And we needed to set the record straight on Medicaid work requirements. Because I never want to hear a person again talk to me about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and people getting kicked off of Medicaid. Tom Tillis, go fly a kite. By the way, you were always a crappy candidate. You were not even a strong candidate. So, see ya. Not going to miss you. Or North Carolina semi-Republican. Some might say a rhino. But anyway, he's a no vote on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Trump very excited that he is not going to run for re-election. He announced over the weekend, Tillis did, that he's out. Not going to miss you, Tillis. I don't want to hear from you or anybody else about Medicaid work requirements because you suck at life if you want to talk to me about Medicaid work requirements. And you are a slug. You are a real disgusting slug. Not even like the ones that are kind of cute. You're like, you know what? See what this one does here. Hopefully it doesn't tear up my garden. You know, that kind of slug? No, not even the one that it might have redeeming quality. There's nothing redeeming about the kind of slugs that have been sucking off the government teat on Medicaid that would get kicked off of this thing. And so, yeah, I do not have any. Yeah, I'm a nature lover, generally. That's kind of the way I roll. So I do not have anything against your run-the-mill slug. But I have a very strong aversion to your average able-bodied, take advantage of Uncle Sam kind of scumbag slug. And that's because in this instance, Sam I am, and you are too. We are Sam, right? Where's the money coming from that pays for all this? You work, you pay your taxes. And while you work your butt off to pay your taxes, they sit there like a slug and say, give me food and give me free health care. See, while spending more time studying the OBBBA, as the case technically happens to be, spending more time studying it than potentially some in Congress have, it's been clear that much like the lead up to 2017's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, you know, the original Trump tax cuts, there are just an endless amount of lies and mistruths that are being peddled to you. And of all the untruths, of all the misleading themes, none of them has been more annoying to me. Nothing has grinded my gears more than all of the crap about Medicaid and snap cuts. Question for you. Do you believe that able-bodied people of working age should do at least 20 hours of anything constructive with their life in a given week? This is the question here. Do you think able-bodied people of working age should find 20 hours of anything other than sitting their butts on a couch eating bonbons. Do you think they should have to do 20 hours of anything constructive in your average week? And if you think that's the case, then 100% of the noise you hear about Medicaid and SNAP cuts is BS. It's absolute B-stinkin'-S. Under the Senate's version of the one big, potentially aesthetically pleasing Bill Act, the Medicaid work requirements state able-bodied adults between the ages of 19 to 64, okay, between 19 to 64, able-bodied, must work, volunteer, or participate in job training or educational activities for at least 80 hours per month, which they break out to 20 hours per week to maintain eligibility. Okay? Able-bodied adults between the ages of 19 to 64 must work, volunteer, or participate in job training or educational activities. Do anything but be a slug. Do anything constructive in your life for about 20 hours a week, and you can stay on the government teat. And by the way, exemptions include pregnant women, any individual with disabilities, the medically frail, foster youth under 26, tribal members, those meeting TANF or SNAP work requirements, and caregivers of dependent children age 14 or younger. And so you got a heck of a lot of exemptions in there too. Now, for SNAP requirements, the Senate version says able-bodied adults without dependents aged 18 to 65 must work, volunteer, or participate in job training or educational activities for at least 20 hours a week against the whole 80 hours a month kind of thing to maintain eligibility. Exemptions include parents or household members with dependent children 7 or younger. So very similar to the Medicaid piece, just a little bit different. Age range is slightly shifted, and then the exemption situation is a little bit different. So when you hear the fear being spread about Medicaid or SNAP programs, that's what we're talking about. 20 hours a week of anything constructive. Work. Try to find work. Try to go into some kind of training to make yourself useful to somebody at work. Volunteer. That's it. 20 hours. I can't even imagine not finding a way to do something constructive with my life for 20 hours a week. I'm in hour 16 of my day today. No kidding. This is the 16th hour I'm working today. I'll be 17 by the time I wrap up the show. That's today. I cannot imagine not finding a way to accidentally even be productive for 20 hours a week. But then they want free healthcare, free food, free everything paid for by you. It is just... So yeah, just say no to slugs. Say no to slugs. Anybody who says, we can't get rid of the people on Medicaid and SNAP, you're full of crap. You're full of crap. Now, I mentioned that if you want lower taxes, the BBB is a beautiful thing. Well, so the Burn, you heard him there. He huffed, he puffed. And you had Pocahontas who whined. You had Tom Tillis that I referenced siding with the slugs. But in the end, it is likely that the majority of the Senate will soon pass President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It's not a given. but it is more likely than not, given that we've gotten this far. But it's not just that Trump's agenda is on the line. Let's talk about what actually is in this for you, what it really means to you, because all of the politics and the rhetoric around it, it's kind of like lost. And hold on, this is incredibly consequential for you. You remember during the debate in the lead up to President Trump's 2017 tax plan, right? The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Remember how you were routinely lied to by fake news? Remember how they told you that it would only be tax cuts for the rich, and it would only be higher taxes for you? That endless drumbeat you heard for months before it finally passed in December of 2017. You know, the lying was so pervasive early on with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, even after the new policy was in place. So this was after it passed and Americans began to start to feel the impact of this, or at least they should have if they were paying attention. Only 17% of Americans polled by NBC News and the Wall Street Journal thought that they were getting a tax break. That is how brainwashed people had been by your godless, soulless, and slanderous news media. That only 17% of Americans thought they were getting a tax break when they actually were. In reality, over 80% of Americans saw a tax break. And the average savings, $2,100 per tax filer per year. That first year. And that was a number that actually only grew over the past 7.5 years that it has been the law. I mean, and one of the things that I do think is instructive here is that is how effective your GSS media was at brainwashing people back then. That you could be receiving a $2,100 tax break and not think that you're getting it. Well, anyway, surprise, surprise, the GSS media has been at it again. But let's start with the bottom line. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act is a financial lifeline for the average household. This thing is huge. It's major money to you. How much? I'll break it down next. Brian Mudd in for the great one.
Mudd Levin.
Pure Talk, my wireless company, a veteran-led company, believes every man and woman who has faithfully served this country deserves to proudly fly an American flag that was made in America. And listen to this. That's why Pure Talk is on a mission to give an allegiance flag, the highest quality American flag ever, to 1,000 U.S. veterans in time for the patriotic holidays. Switch your cell phone service to Pure Talk today. Know that you're supporting a company that will be providing these high-quality flags made in America to deserving veterans. With plans from just $25 a month for unlimited talk, text, and plenty of data, you can enjoy America's most dependable 5G network while cutting your cell phone bill, in many cases, in half. The average Pure Talk family saves over $1,000 a year. Just go to puretalk.com/Levin. That's puretalk.com/Levin to switch hassle-free in as little as 10 minutes. Again, that's puretalk.com/Levin. Switch to a wireless company that supports our veterans, that is patriotic, based right here in America. Switch to Pure Talk.
We need the full weight of the Republican conference to get behind this bill, and we expect them to, and we are confident that they will.
Yeah, so Press Secretary Caroline Levitt today talking about the BBB, and Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin. President is going to have to put some serious weight down. You have Elon Musk in real time that is trying to put all of his weight down. He's already promised now to primary any member of Congress who ran on lowering the deficit, that they're going to get primaried. And then he said yet again that we need a new third party. He said we only have one party in Washington, the Porky Pig Party, which is kind of funny. I mean, kind of. So anyway, there's that going on. So Elon is trying to blow up the BBB here at the 11th hour as we are getting ready to move from voter-rama in the Senate to an eventual floor vote. I think that may still be happening tonight. We'll see where the ball lands in this deal. Telling you what this actually means to you. You know, so often you just hear some numbers thrown around. A lot of it's about debt over the course of 10 years, often numbers that are just massive and may or may not mean a whole lot to you. And you just think somewhere along the way, the story doesn't end well with the whole debt picture and all that, which is reasonable and correct at a certain point. What does this actually mean for you? Do you know, first piece, if the One Big Beautiful Bill Act doesn't pass and we just have nothing new that takes its place, do you know what you will end up paying in taxes? Do you know what the household savings is in today's money for the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that went into place, again, in December 2017? It amounts for the average tax filer to 22%. That's not peanuts. Not peanuts. For the average household, federal income tax liability, your taxes would go up by $3,908 per year. If we don't have, at a minimum, the Trump tax cuts being made permanent, average household immediately sees a tax increase of over $3,900 per year. But wait, there's more, actually much more, because 84% of households will see additional tax cuts beyond the current policy, averaging $2,900 annually. So you add it up, and here's what this actually means to you. $6,800. That's what's at stake per year for the average family. You can have a tax increase of $3,900 per year or an additional tax cut of $2,900 a year. And this comes when you factor in all the various different things that are in this. A beefed up child tax credit, no federal tax on tips or overtime pay, higher standard deduction. I mean, we're talking not just real money, but huge money staying in the pocket of the average person. And it's not a one-size-fits-all deal. It's packed with targeted breaks for a lot of folks who need it most, like seniors over 65, with increased deductions and the like. We'll talk about this more. Also, see about taking some of your calls, too. Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin.
Pure Talk, my wireless company, a veteran-led company, believes every man and woman who has faithfully served this country deserves to proudly fly an American flag that was made in America. And listen to this. That's why Pure Talk is on a mission to give an allegiance flag, the highest quality American flag ever, to 1,000 U.S. veterans in time for the patriotic holidays. Switch your cell phone service to Pure Talk today. Know that you're supporting a company that will be providing these high-quality flags made in America to deserving veterans. With plans from just $25 a month for unlimited talk, text, and plenty of data, you can enjoy America's most dependable 5G network while cutting your cell phone bill, in many cases, in half. The average Pure Talk family saves over $1,000 a year. Just go to puretalk.com/Levin. That's puretalk.com/Levin to switch hassle-free in as little as 10 minutes. Again, that's puretalk.com/Levin. Switch to a wireless company that supports our veterans, that is patriotic, based right here in America. Switch to Pure Talk.
It's your daily adult dosage of the Constitution. The Mark Levin Show. Call in now at 877-381-3811.
If we don't pass the bill, the Council of Economic Advisors here at the White House has said that it's going to cause GDP to drop 4%, one of the biggest recessions in history because of a massive tax hike. And honestly, that's why this bill is going to pass.
Yeah, correct. Kevin has it there again. This is real money, right? This isn't like oh, we're just throwing these big debt numbers out there, and it's theoretical tax savings, and look at the illegal immigrants that might not have Medicaid or SNAP or something. No. What does this actually mean to you? This means if this doesn't pass, Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires, it means your taxes go up by $3,900 per year. That's step one. For all the sub-moron Democrat whoever's out there, they're like, yeah, let this thing expire. You don't want $3,900 in tax savings? You lie. You lie. You're not telling the truth. But again, that's the jumping off point. Taxes for the average household would go up $3,900 a year. Or you pass this, not only does that not happen, but your household sees an additional $2,900 in tax savings beyond where you are today annually. What do you want? You want $6,800 round trip in tax benefit or not? And this is where the rubber really meets the road. Nobody really breaks it down and has an honest conversation about these things. By the way, Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin, host of the Brian Mudd Show, my home station WJNO in West Palm Beach. Catch the Brian Mudd Show podcast wherever you get your podcast, at Brian Mudd Radio socially. Would love to connect with you. It is always truly an honor and a pleasure to be right here with you. And as always, there are two sides to stories and one side of facts. And we are talking about the facts of the one big, beautiful bill that might be in peril. So here's some other things that kind of go into this. Seniors get an additional boost. Do you have a car loan? Do you have an auto loan? Because if you do, there's a new deduction in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act for the interest that you're paying on car loans. You take a standard deduction, 91% of taxpayers do. The standard deduction for everybody increases if this thing passes. Servers, bartenders, anyone earning tips or overtime, huge, huge tax break too. And so the bottom line is that you take a look at the Senate version of the bill, and you have $6,808 for the average household that is on the line here. This is the choice. This is the choice. And so one of the most important conversations right now, if this does end up passing the Senate tonight, is with your House representative. Are they going to vote for the One Big Beautiful Bill Act? Or are they going to torpedo it, and along with it, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, Trump's tax policy the first time? So are they going to give you a $3,900 tax increase? Or are they going to give you an additional $2,900 tax cut? That is the conversation here. And oh, by the way, that's just what's in it for you. Because, lest we forget, Trump's entire agenda is in this thing too. You want to be able to finish the southern border wall? You want to carry out mass deportations of illegal immigrants? So when you talk to your House representative, you can remind them that you voted for Trump's agenda, not theirs. There's one thing above and beyond with this, because I get the debt piece. I do. There are legitimate arguments around the amount of spending and everything else that's going on here. But you know who wants this thing? Donald Trump wants this thing. Now, when has Donald Trump, in his first term, or so far in his second, when has he demanded that he get something where we haven't won in the end? What thing has he been so adamant about that when he got it, it backfired. It blew up on us. If anybody deserves the benefit of the doubt, it is the president of the United States. So the bottom line is that you passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act because it's huge money to you and me. And it's Trump's agenda that is hanging in the balance with this thing. And by the way, I'm going to do a little bit more breaking down specifically on how those numbers come to be, because I know I already some questions that are around that thing. But first, let's go to the phones. Patiently, William in Salt Lake City has been hanging on. William, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm calling via Sirius Satellite. I wanted to say, spare my worthless and forgetful, if not ignorant life, as I throw myself at your feet that I had a couple of questions. It goes back a ways. You were talking earlier about the candidate for New York City. That I can't pronounce his name.
Mamdani?
And yeah. And then I heard back then that everybody was going to put a boycott on everything New York State, business and occupation, good heavens, everything. And the New York taxpayer dollars were going to convict President Trump on and go to a boycott and avoid New York State businesses. Did you ever hear about that? If you know who started it, is it still on? And at what point should it be lifted? And I had a question about the geography of New York City.
Okay, so, I mean, the couple things that are interesting here, because I'm actually in the third hour of the show going to get into New York City's demise in some of this. The boycott of New York City, there's no effective boycott that I'm aware of that is currently in place. And the one thing that you do have that's going on in real time in New York City is that businesses that were already fleeing, they're speeding that up. Businesses that had not fled New York City but were on the fence are now getting off the fence, and they're not waiting to the election. And then you have a lot of businesses, and specifically talking about Wall Street in particular, where they were not even considering leaving, that are now getting onto the fence, waiting to see whether or not you're going to have what it basically amounts. I mean, he calls himself a socialist, but in reality is a communist. That is the next mayor of New York City, someone who wants government run grocery stores and doesn't believe that there should be rich people, and actually has advocated for the end of the prison system, among other things. So anyway, we'll get into New York's situation a little bit and how it plays into some of the bigger picture in the third hour. But yeah, I mean, in terms of what you're talking about, not aware of anything that's really effective that way. The biggest people that New Yorkers have to worry about from a business standpoint right now is everybody who has brain cells that are left that can leave the city, that are in the process of doing so based upon how the city is eating itself in real time. Let's go to Ward in Texas. Ward, welcome to the show.
Thank you. You're talking about people required to work
yes, sir.
When they're on the government dole. How about if you're on unemployment, you have to work?
Yeah, so you're talking about checking in and needing to keep up with requirements to maintain unemployment.
No, I'm talking about they got to work 20 hours a week. I mean, the country is an S-hole, all right? It's filthy out here, and it needs to be cleaned because I see it every day.
Yeah, so when you talk about somebody that's on unemployment, obviously to keep up with what you're supposed to do in order to maintain unemployment is show that you're looking for a job. Because obviously you wouldn't be on unemployment if you are actually working at least 20 hours a week. So I think ultimately what you mean is that people need to be doing that. But you have had many locales. You say that you should be on unemployment and you can't find work or whatever, that you get it. There's not really any checks and balances there. And so, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of places that have run unemployment that way for quite some time. And we're talking about getting back to some accountability here. This is the same thing. It's why it's absurd on its face that we're talking about work requirements for Medicaid and for SNAP. Because the people that would be kicked out, again, all we're talking about, it's just kind of like your idea of the unemployment benefits where, okay, you don't have work, you can collect unemployment, just show us some evidence that you're actually trying to get work again. And you get to keep those benefits. Well, okay, so you want free health care. You want the American taxpayers, everybody else around you that is not sitting on the couch eating bonbons, you want them to pay for health care for you so you can go about having that for free. Okay, and you want food stamps along with that. So you want us to pay for your food and your health care. What we are requiring of you to do that, 20 hours a week of anything constructive. This could be 20 hours a week of work. This could be 20 hours a week of job training. This could be 20 hours of work or a week of educational activities if you're in school or going back to school. It could be 20 hours a week of volunteering. So in other words, there is something that everybody could do. It's not I can't find work. It's not I'm having a real hard time even finding, opportunities to job train. There are no excuses here. You can always find some place that you could volunteer. So that is all that is required for these types of things. And so, yes, getting accountability back into these government programs is paramount. And that's all we're talking about is the absolute minimum amount of accountability in these government programs with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And it is repulsive and it's actually offensive that you would have some people that would say, no, we can't do that. We can't have even 20 hours of volunteering for people of working age that are able-bodied. It's downright offensive. Let's see. Take a look. I want to get into some of the details here about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and how I got from here to there and the numbers, because already I've had some questions that have come in and like, okay, well, here's my situation. Does this mean I'm going to get, this big of a tax cut and how this all goes down? So I want to break down very specifically how the number adds up to the $2,900 in additional tax savings that I was just bringing you, along with, talking about what's at stake if we lose the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So I will begin that part of the conversation next. Brian Mudd in for the great one.
Mark Levin.
Pure Talk, my wireless company, a veteran-led company, believes every man and woman who has faithfully served this country deserves to proudly fly an American flag that was made in America. And listen to this. That's why Pure Talk is on a mission to give an allegiance flag, the highest quality American flag ever, to 1,000 U.S. veterans in time for the patriotic holidays. Switch your cell phone service to Pure Talk today. Know that you're supporting a company that will be providing these high-quality flags made in America to deserving veterans. With plans from just $25 a month for unlimited talk, text, and plenty of data, you can enjoy America's most dependable 5G network while cutting your cell phone bill, in many cases, in half. The average Pure Talk family saves over $1,000 a year. Just go to puretalk.com/Levin. That's puretalk.com/Levin to switch hassle-free in as little as 10 minutes. Again, that's puretalk.com/Levin. Switch to a wireless company that supports our veterans, that is patriotic, based right here in America. Switch to Pure Talk.
After the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed, unemployment hit a 50-year low, poverty levels at record level lows, and incomes grew.
Yeah, that is Senate Majority Leader John Thune. That was him on the floor today talking about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and referenced how we were being lied to for so long that you didn't even have a fifth of people after the tax cuts had begun to kick in that thought they were getting a tax cut when they were getting over $2,000 a year in tax benefit. But what does it mean to you today? Well, again, the average household, if the Trump tax cuts of 2017, if they expire, if we don't pass the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the average household sees a tax increase of $3,900. But then you get into the tax savings. And I mentioned for the average household, it's an additional $2,900 in tax benefits. So let's get to some of the details on this. So one of the first things that impacts just about everybody, you have 91% of people that use a standard deduction. The standard deduction under the One Big Beautiful Bill is raised to $16,000 for individuals, $32,000 for married couples. That is $1,000 more per person than the current law. So again, 91% of all taxpayers immediately benefit from that. You're familiar with the concept of no tax on tips and overtime. The bill does eliminate federal income taxes on tips and overtime pay through 2028 at a minimum. The tax savings per eligible employee. So if you are someone who earns tips or earns overtime pay during the course of a year, the average savings will be $1,750 just on that piece, just on your tips piece, just on the overtime piece. Big money. The child tax credit increase. So the child tax credit would be permanently set at $2,000 per child with an increase to $2,500 through 2028. That benefits over 40 million families on the increase in the child tax credit. The senior tax break that I've referenced, so it raises the standard deduction for seniors 65 and older to $6,000. This equates to an additional tax cut per single filers of just over $1,000 annually. And if you're a joint filing couple, both over 65, you're talking $2,000 additional dollars on average per household just on the increase in the senior tax break. I mentioned car loans. If you have a car loan, there is a provision that will allow you to deduct, even using the standard deduction, your auto loan. That'll save the average person with a car loan $475 per year in taxes. And again, when you blend all of this stuff out, it comes down for the average household to an additional $2,900 tax cut per year. So you can have a $3,900 tax increase or an additional $2,900 tax cut. And if you played man on the street, your average Democrat voter, what are they going to do here? If anybody's having an honest moment, what are they going to do here? And this is why it's important to get in the ear of your House representative, because they need to know that not only do you not want a $3,900 tax increase because they can't get their button gear, you want your $2,900 tax decrease from what you're already paying right now. That is what's at stake here. And again, 84% of households see the increased tax break. That's what we're talking about. Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin.
He's here. Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Mark Levin.
Just look at the Democrat nominee for New York City Mayor, Zohran Mamdani. He's a Democrat socialist, really a communist, who proudly calls to defund the police, peddles anti-Semitism, praises pro-Hamas groups, wants Israel abolished, and believes wealthy Americans should not exist.
That is a pretty solid guy, really. You get past the whole, hey, it's communist thing, not so bad. What a week. What a week plus we've had. New York City's demise is going to be the gain of a lot of other places, but most especially Florida and South Florida, where I derive from in particular. And we'll talk about some enormous damage here as well. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin. By the way, I'm like the My setup is the opposite of Mark's in like every possible way, because, I'm not in an underground bunker and all that. I sit in a studio 7 feet above sea level that once had its roof ripped off during the hurricanes, all that kind of stuff. So it's nowhere near that kind of bunker stuff. Not too far from where the president lives when he's not at the White House these days. But other than that, let's get into this a little bit, talking about some of what's happened over the past week, some perspective as we take a look at where we're going from here. As we wrap up the first half of the year, one of the things that's just kind of like back crap crazy. AOC, she qualifies. By the way, some breaking news here. This is interesting. Reporters are Tom Homan. He has confirmed that AOC is under federal investigation now for employing a criminal illegal. This is great. Not only has AOC on her congressional staff, allegedly, employed an illegal alien, but a criminal illegal alien. That's fun. And has also taught that staffer how to evade ICE. This alleged by Tom Homan. This is, that'll be interesting. That'll be interesting. That'll be something. Speaking of New York City just kind of eating itself. Good Lord. But anyway, 1984. I say 1984. What comes to mind? It might be big hair, right? Might be some good music. There's some, I'm a fan of the 80s music. But now for me, like if I'm thinking 84, way I'm wired, kind of like the first thing that comes to mind, the Reagan Revolution. It was in full swing. The Gipper carried 49 states. One of the things that pains me to this day for Ronald Reagan, that he lost Minnesota by less than 1 point. He came within a point of a clean sweep of winning every single state. Unreal, right? Anyway, but I think of that when I think of 80. I think of George Orwell. When I think 1984, that book comes to mind. The theoretical future that kind of seems a little too real until around January 20th. And something that doesn't come to mind when you hear that year is Iran, right? When you think 1984, you're not thinking about Iran, are you? But just kind of putting some things in perspective for a moment. You know how you had heard about the Iran nuclear program for as long as you could remember, and that it was a problem? They were going to work on building a nuclear program, then eventually they're going to work on nuclear weapons, and then they are working on all this stuff. 1984. That's how long this has been going on. That was when Iran started their nuclear program. And so you got to take a look at what's happened in just over the past week. 41 years worth of worry and frustration came crashing down with 14 MOPs. And then 1949. What comes to mind when you think of 1949? Other than maybe like Joe Biden having been in his third term in the Senate by that point. It might have been his fourth, but, I think it was his third. Now, I'm not sure if anything specific comes to mind, but that happens to be the year that NATO, speaking of Biden, was established. In 76 years is how long, as Americans, we have been getting ripped off by our allies. Now, despite NATO having 32 nations, we, the United States, have paid 68.7% of the freight for defense within the alliance. Because here's the next point that is really important in this conversation that I want to drive home, because I didn't really hear this being done. And again, it's kind of my thing to be the analytical fact person, fill in some of these blanks. The United States, we pay 68.7% of the freight for defense within the alliance. When you hear that NATO is being asked, these countries were being asked to spend 5% of their GDP, why? Was that just a number that Trump pulled out of thin air going back to the first term of his administration? Was it just, an arbitrary? No, it was not. That unbalance is how much we need these countries to pay for them to be accounting for their population-adjusted share of NATO defense. When you adjust for population, the United States is 35% of NATO. Again, we have been paying 68.7% of defense spend within this alliance. And this has created all kinds of opportunities for us to be taken advantage of, because one of the big things about being in NATO is what? Well, if you're in it, then any act of aggression against any NATO member means that everybody else has to defend them. And so what ended up happening from the word go 76 years ago, everybody just let the United States do it. Oh, A, nobody's going to attack us because we've got the U.S. involved in NATO. And B, the United States is going to take care of it anyway. Let them pay for the world's defense. And we did that. And so what Trump accomplished last week, when he got every NATO country but Spain to agree to spend 5% of their GDP on defense, was that he's ensuring that we're not going to get ripped off the way we have been for 76 years. Just like that, 76 years of Americans being ripped off, protecting everybody else, came to an end. And by the way, as for Spain, I don't know if you caught this, but, so Spain went rogue. They're like, no, we're not going to go along with it. And they're somewhere in the neighborhood of like 2% in their defense spend. Trump said, yeah, their trade deal, they're going to be paying double what all other European countries pay to do trade with us. So if you have anything you want to buy from Spain, by the way, good time to do it before that hits. But anyway, so they're not going to get a free lunch on that deal anyway. But here's what this means to you and me. And this is another piece as we've been talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And as we've been talking about, the tax savings, but also you take a look at the cost of this thing over time. What you hear in terms of the numbers about debt being added and the spending, a lot of times historically, when you have numbers that come out of Congress like this, it ends up being worse than what you hear originally. Donald Trump's administration is the only time it's gone the other way. That was true with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, where the Congressional Budget Office was, projecting only about 2% growth, and we ended up getting 4%. Meaning that we ended up being in a much better fiscal situation until COVID than they said we were going to be with the passing of that tax policy. And we've got a different version of a similar thing going on here, because not only is the Trump tax policy, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, likely to be far more stimulative to the economy, thus producing more tax revenue than what the CBO is projecting, but there are other things that come into play. For example, just getting NATO to pay their fair share. Do you know what we're going to be able to do once they're up to speed on this? That carries an estimated annual cost savings to you and me of $440 billion per year. If you want to know how much we've been getting ripped off as Americans per year by our NATO allies, and I say that in parentheses, $440 billion. That is what Trump got accounted for last week. Big time, right? And so as we're talking about just how good a lot of things have been over the past week plus, if you've been paying attention to your 401k, you're doing more than okay. We closed out the first half of the year record highs, having rebounded by well more than 20% from the April lows, and what proved to be one of the greatest buying opportunities in American history, just as I may have predicted that it would be at the absolute lows in April, just saying. And by the way, what's interesting in that whole deal, too, because, Liberation Day, that wasn't at the beginning of April, but that was part of this quarter. So that whole sell-off that happened was all inside of the second quarter, and yet the second quarter proved to be the best quarter for the NASDAQ in 5 years. So it's been an incredible ride. You know, our country has been winning. Trump's been winning. You're probably winning. I never get tired of it. It's good to actually do it again. But it's easy to miss a lot of it. One of the things that is set to lose, you might say bigly, that would be New York City. So about the New York City mayoral thing, 3 thoughts on this. Zohran Mamdani's winning the Democrat primary is the greatest gift known to the GOP. The second thought is that he may not win the general election. May not. And my third is that it's already a big win for a lot of places that get business from New York. It's already a huge win in Florida, specifically South Florida, where I am. And if he does win the general election, it's going to be a historic win for South Florida. And on the first point about the gift to the GOP, having an overt anti-Semitic socialist winning the Democrat primary in the largest city in the country pretty much says everything you need to know about the state of the Democrat Party. You know, Democrats time and again continue to pretend that they are not really socialist, at least in general elections anyway. In primaries, pretty much pandered to that anymore. But in general election, no, we're not socialist. Well, their policies are in line with socialist policies. Their elected officials are increasingly not just like overt socialists anymore, but actually guy preaches communism. I mean, we are talking about, and this is somebody who's on the record as saying, we want to seize the means of production. I mean, that quite literally is communism. So this guy is on the record that way. And also the whole government-run grocery store thing. Yeah. Hello, Cuba. So anyway, it's an easy contrast for any reasonably minded person to see that is made especially easy with politicians like Mamdani winning Democrat primaries. So you're going to continue to see Jews and Hispanics flee the DNC for the GOP. On that note, by the way, you just had the Pew Research Center. They completed their they have the most comprehensive study that's done. It's verified voters, only people that are verified to have voted in the previous presidential election. So the overall Jewish support for Republicans almost doubled. 16% historically, 31% last November. Hispanics, Trump increased the vote share by 8 points. Ended up getting 45% of the Hispanic vote. And so you start taking a look at some of these things, and those trends are going to continue. And then you start to take a look at some of the other dynamics in that race, and I'll pick up there next. Brian Mudd in for the great one.
Mark Levin.
Mamdani's immigration policy is also raising eyebrows. He wants to strengthen New York City's sanctuary city law by not allowing any ICE cooperation in the city's jail. And he wants to spend $165 million tax dollars on providing illegal immigrants legal defense.
Yeah, there you go. That's winning. So that's Fox's Brian Yennis on that report. I mean, what could go wrong with that situation? But again, this is somebody who was previously campaigned, not during this campaign, but he has campaigned in terms of his political activism for an end to the prison system, just an end to it altogether. So, I mean, not a big surprise, really, when you have somebody who's really an anarchist in addition to a communist. So, yeah, I mean, that'll work out great for New York if so this is why, for example, there are a lot of other places that stand to win right now. So, you know, I mentioned with the whole Mamdani thing that he's a gift to the GOP. This is another example because really hard for Democrats to continue to say that they really aren't for open borders and treating illegal immigrants better than they treat you and your family. But I did mention that he may not necessarily win. We'll see. You know, you do have Mayor Eric Adams that's running as an independent. Same time, you do have Cuomo in what? I guess he's staying on the ballot, trying to decide if he's actually going to run a campaign, but he'll keep his name on the ballot at a minimum. I mean, that doesn't help Adams. You would figure that they might split votes. And who knows? I mean, maybe the single best thing that could possibly happen for New York City would be, Republican Curtis Lewa, of course, the founder of the Guardian Angels, to actually slide through somehow. Who knows? I mean, maybe if you get that whole really whacked out four-way thing going and, stars align and something amazing happens for the city, that would be cool. But anyway, yeah, I mean, look, Mamdani looks like he's in the driver's seat, and you got a lot of people that are like, so I'm out of here. And one of the great examples of this is a CNBC story recently. Their headline, Zohran Mamdani's victory in New York City mayoral primary leaves Wall Street alarmed and depressed. And as is cited pretty early in the story, they say, Philippe Lafont, founder of hedge fund Coates Management, told CNBC that a Mamdani win could trigger another exodus of wealthy investors. Since the pandemic, a wave of wealthy residents and institutional firms have fled the nation's largest city for low-tax states such as Florida and Texas. Right. And so South Florida already been dubbed Wall Street South due to the previous exodus from the semi-socialist state of New York. 56 financial firms relocated to Florida since the pandemic, since 2020. You have this happen? Oh, my gosh. And in real time, you already have a bunch of firms that are leaving for South Florida already. So, anyway, Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin.
Mark Levin, the George S. Patton of Talk Radio. Call him at 877-381-3811. That's 877-381-3811.
We went in, we destroyed their nuclear capability, and we stopped. It was a beautiful thing.
Yeah, sure enough was. Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin. And it is always an honor and a pleasure being here with you. You can reach me at Brian Mudd Radio socially. Check out the Brian Mudd Show podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And one of my favorite things is spending time with you. And time flies. And so I want to, I'd be remiss if before the end of the show, I didn't talk about some of the unprecedented success. And so, some frustrations about some of the developments that are happening, including some of the challenges on the horizon with the BBB. We are set for unprecedented success. Maybe not New York City at this point, but this country, we have set ourselves up for unprecedented success, and it's got a lot to do with the President of the United States. So you take a look, it's talking about, so many of the great things that have happened over the past week. Trump's willingness to drop the MOPs on Iran's nuclear facilities. We have peace that is sticking a week later in that situation. NATO summit where, so 41 years worth of worrying about Iran's nuclear program deals with that. 76 years again ripped off by NATO. He deals with that. And then you start taking a look at some of the other things that are taking place. I mean, times have changed here. Gone are the days where wars mean boots on the ground. We can drop 14 MOPs and be done with it. Gone are the days where we just get ripped off by the rest of the world. And you start taking a look at, okay, well, where are we heading now? So you remember where we were just over 5 years ago before the impact of the China virus? Remember when we had record low unemployment rates? Remember when we had a 4% growth economy? Remember when we had a 1% inflation rate? Remember when we had the best wage growth since the 90s? Remember when we had the lowest crime rates in decades? Remember when illegal immigration was no longer a problem? Along with relative peace and stability? I mean, think about it. That was just over 5 years ago. All those things existed into early 2020. In other words, do you remember when essentially President Trump had made America great again just prior to the impact of the pandemic? Okay? Here's what's happening. We are right now on a path towards unprecedented success in this country. If we stick the landing on this thing, if we don't screw this up, we're on a path towards unprecedented success. You know, here we are wrapping up the first half of the year today, and just over 5 months of Trump's second administration. It's been all about putting out fires. I mean, pretty much everything he's done up to now has been putting up fires. It's been cleaning up the mess that was left behind by Dementia Joe and Team Autopen. And some of the mess in this country and around the world is going to take a lot more time, right? Like, you know, Russia's Ukrainian invasion and working out the situation in Gaza. But speaking of cleaning up Biden's messes and invasion, there is an awful lot of work to do on Biden's permitted illegal immigrant invasion. But we have learned from ICE recently. You wonder, like, how many criminal illegal immigrants were allowed into the country by ICE under the Biden administration? 435,719. There were criminal illegal immigrants, with an additional 226,847 pending charges against them. I mean, that's fun. So, I mean, we got that kind of a mess to be cleaning up, too. But then again, you know, the Supreme Court's rulings recently should help in a really good way to take care of those bad hombres. But speaking of something that'll help us towards unprecedented success on the immigration side, Customs and Border Patrol. You know, even attempted border crossings are now down 93% from a year ago. Even the attempts are down 93% from a year ago. Those that actually gain access to our country remain at record lows. Record recorded lows. But my real message in this thing is that if there is anything that we have learned by now, after 4 years and 5+ months of Trump as president of the United States, it should be to trust Trump's process. We should be trusting his process. You know, Elon right now is saying, hey, basically any Republican, but he's saying any member of Congress who ran on lowering the deficit, lowering talking about budget, I'm going to primary you, and you're going to lose if it's the last thing I do on this earth. I mean, that is something that he is. I will point out that Elon tends to get emotional. You know, we learned recently that he went full Epstein on Trump and then like 2 days later was apologizing to him. So we have learned that Elon Musk has the ability on social media to lose his cheese and later regret it. So, I mean, maybe he'll sing a different tune, but he is talking again about doing a third party. He is threatening members of the GOP to try to tank the one big, potentially aesthetically pleasing bill. But I do think there's maybe even a 50-50 chance of one day you might see Musk break out his Trump was right about everything hat. Remember that hat? Trump was right about everything. Because how many times has Trump, along the way, said something that maybe even you, if you're a supporter, thought, you know what? That sounds crazy. It does not seem possible. It doesn't sound right. And then it might be years down the line and you're like, holy crap, he was right. President Trump has proven to be right about just about everything from a policy perspective. And importantly, all of the major things. So what does this mean? Because there's a lot of skepticism out there, and I get the concerns about the debt. But who did you vote for? And what did you vote for? Did you vote for Donald Trump? And did you vote for his agenda? Now, what does the man want? He wants this thing like we haven't seen him want things. He wants the One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed, period. So it's time to pass the BBB. You know, last week was all about foreign affairs, wrapping all that stuff up. This week, it's all about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and specifically the fate of the Trump 2.0 agenda, because that's really the bigger thing here. And so you've got the Senate parliamentarian that becomes a fly in the ointment. As I said at the onset of the show, it is time for J.D. Vance to step in and do what he can do and put an end to the nonsense with the Senate parliamentarian. And some of the big things, like, for example, criminal illegal immigrants being able to stay on Medicaid because of the Senate parliamentarian, and Democrats that actually voted to keep it in place. Just so you are aware, today, Democrats have voted to keep all illegal immigrants in this country on Medicaid, and that includes the criminal illegal immigrants. So, again, you continue to not be treated as well as even criminal illegal immigrants in this country. But anyway, so you got things like that get involved. You'll hear about the Byrd rule, the Senate rule adopted after, the KKK organizer, the longtime now dead Democrat senator that all the Democrats end up thinking was a great guy. I mean, what a great KKK organizer. And he's got this big rule that stipulates what can be considered for reconciliation. That's what the Senate parliamentarian rules on in the first place. So, I mean, again, Vance, the rule adopted by the KKK organizer and enforced by the parliamentarian, you can do things about this. So it's time that he should. But the bottom line is that we are on the path of unprecedented success, despite all the challenges that are in front of us right now. If we continue to move forward with all the recent wins, we give Trump what he wants, we deliver his agenda, you get an additional $2,900 tax cut on average over where you are right now. We're going to make America great again. Again. It's going to be like it was heading into COVID, probably even better. But Congress has got to do its job this week, too. That is paramount in all this. Let's go to Robert in Little Rock. He's been very patient. Robert, welcome to the show.
Man, you missed your mud.
Yes, sir. Hey, Robert.
Yeah, I'm here in Little Rock. I'm a Medicaid and Medicare recipient. I'm disabled. And I'm wondering about this food stamp requirement. Does disability have a disqualifying for food stamps? Or
no, so
you might not know.
The disability. So go back to the requirement. So, yeah, as a disabled person, Medicaid, you get to keep. And the way that the Senate version of the bill was written on SNAP is able-bodied adults without dependents aged 18 to 65. So that's where you get in, is able-bodied adults without dependents aged 18 to 65. So if you do not fall into that category as disabled, then that should not impact you.
Oh, I hope so. Either way, I can get a volunteer job at the shelter I used to stay at.
Well, Robert, may God bless you, my friend. Thank you for hanging in there. But yeah, if this passes Medicaid and SNAP, you should still be in line for. Appreciate you being there. Let's go to Tony in Clifton, New Jersey. Tony, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mr. Mudd. How are you tonight?
I am doing very well. How are you?
Good. I'm glad you're there with us. So I wanted to talk to you. I'm so excited about the big tax bill. I think it's doing very well, and I think you're absolutely right. We need to give our president a chance. But I wanted to say that when I look at who was speaking the moment I was watching was Senator Alex Padilla, who was ready to tackle our Secretary of State.
Yes.
Secretary of Homeland Security.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So, he is actually, if you look at him, he was speaking. Now, the whole process was crazy because they read the whole amendment or whatever it was. They read the whole thing. But when I look at all of the people who are serving in our country today, I say to myself, we have people who are Democrats who are not really Democrats. They're really communists and Marxists or whatever we want to call them. Alex Padilla is a case in point. He is, as we said, he went to tackle Kristi Noem had he not been intercepted. But he is on the budget committee. He is ranking member of a rules committee. He's on several committees, and you have to wonder where we're going wrong. The oath of office that all these people who serve take is very simple. It just says you're going to obey the Constitution. But we had two presidents who thought that wasn't enough at critical times, and I believe we are at a critical time. It was President Lincoln who did the ironclad oath of office, which said, not only are you going to take your oath of office, but you're going to say that you've never participated in slavery or any such things like that, because that was crucial for the time. And you're also going to say that you've never done it, and then if you do it, you understand you can be removed, because people don't seem to understand what the Constitution says about your country and supporting your country. It doesn't mean that you could turn. So that's what I want to see in legislation. I've been calling so far. I've been calling because when they take the oath of office, we have a misunderstanding about what that is. It doesn't mean you support illegal immigration. It doesn't mean, and then look at Eisenhower. He said the Anti-Communist Act, he was so worried about it when he became president after fighting the war. He said, you know what, you have to take an office the same way.
You're exactly right, Tony. I appreciate the call. You know your stuff, and you're right on point. These are historical times, and this has been the long game. You point out that a lot of these people are basically Marxists that hide in, traditional Democrat clothing, at least in general elections still, to try to get themselves elected. I mean, Mark wrote the book on this a few years back, American Marxism, and they have played the long game. I mean, look, Woodrow Wilson was kind of like the all-time progressive, and a lot of this is just a different version of a similar thing. We've certainly talked about rules for radicals before. That quite literally is where Obama ended up studying from, and the Weather Underground Club. And so you take a look at how the long game has been played and how there is this ebb and flow throughout the course of history. And the politicians change, the issues specifically might change around the edges, but ultimately the mission is the same, and it's to collapse the system, it's to overwhelm the system, and then it's to implement communism. And that's what's happening right now, being attempted in New York City. You're right, that's all part of the so it's all, and I'm going to wrap this up very quickly, but it comes down to education, illegal immigration, and then law enforcement. And those three pieces are how you kind of get from here to there. I'll tie that together in just a moment. Brian Mudd in for the great one.
Mark Levin.
Less than 3 in 5. 58% of Americans say they're very or extremely proud to be an American in a new Gallup poll. 92% of Republicans, 36% of Democrats, the widest split in the poll's history.
Yeah, so that is Fox's Chris Foster. And that's fun. That's fun. Hey, this Independence Day week, it explains some things. And just talking about with the previous caller, the whole Marxist idea here, which is overwhelm the system. So you control education, and you don't teach American exceptionalism. You don't teach the Constitution. So you get generations of people that grow up not having an appreciation for this country. In fact, maybe thinking that socialism just hasn't been done well enough yet. And if only we got it right, or who knows? I mean, maybe even indoctrinated in thinking that it does actually work. And so you do that, and then you let in unprecedented numbers of illegal immigrants without any assimilation. And you figure out how to get them on voter rolls. And at worst, they might have kids, and then they become American citizens because, hey, birthright citizenship. And then you get the law enforcement piece. And so then we just don't enforce our laws. And so they end up on, programs they shouldn't end up on. And so it's a cascading effect. And so that is what we're fighting on all fronts. The end of the Department of Education, the end of birthright citizenship. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It's delivering on the president's agenda. This is how we make America great again. So tune out the noise, take your tax cut, tell your House rep to get on the ball. It's been a pleasure. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin.